I'm Abigail Mitchell, 36 years old, and last Tuesday I sat in the back row of Courtroom 7 watching my sister Diane's fraud trial unfold. For years, my family told everyone I was the failure, the disappointing daughter with the government job. As the judge prepared to announce the verdict, her eyes scanned the courtroom and stopped on me. Her composure cracked. "Wait, you're the governor?" she whispered, microphone unfortunately still on. My parents turned, jaws dropping. Sweet justice has a beautiful timing. Before I continue the story about family betrayal and the most unexpected revenge, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most. Growing up in Lakeside, Maine, I was constantly reminded that excellence was expected, not celebrated. My father, Richard Mitchell, was the chief surgeon at Lakeside Memorial, and my mother, Margaret, held a prestigious position as a tenured literature professor at Northeastern University. Our family name carried weight in our community. The Mitchells were known for their intelligence, achievements, and social standing. Then there was me, and there was Diane. Diane came along when I was 3 years old. From the beginning, she seemed designed to please our parents in ways I never could. She was the beautiful baby who rarely cried, the toddler who spoke in full sentences early, the elementary student whose perfect penmanship and straight-A report cards were displayed prominently on our refrigerator. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. Not that I was failing by normal standards. I maintained B+ averages, participated in debate club, and volunteered at the local animal shelter. But in the Mitchell household, second place might as well have been last. "Abigail has potential," my fourth-grade teacher told my parents during a conference. "She thinks differently, more creatively. She sees connections others miss." Later that night, I overheard my mother's assessment: "Different isn't what gets you into Harvard." While Diane excelled at memorization and standardized tests, I was drawn to community issues and local politics. At 12, I organized a petition to save the historic downtown library from demolition. I gathered over 500 signatures and presented them at a town meeting. It was cute. My father told his colleagues at a dinner party I was allowed to attend if I helped serve dessert. A little civic-minded project to keep her busy. The library still stands today, partly because of that cute project. The defining moment came when I was 14. A new girl, Heather Larson, transferred to our school mid-year. Her clothes were second-hand, her lunch often just a sandwich, and a group of popular girls targeted her mercilessly. One day in the cafeteria, I found them surrounding Heather, who was in tears as they mocked her worn-out shoes. I still remember stepping between them, my voice surprisingly steady. "That's enough." One of the girls, ironically the daughter of my father's hospital colleague, sneered. "What are you going to do about it, Mitchell?" "I'm going to sit with Heather every day. And I'm going to make sure Principal Warner knows exactly who's responsible if this continues." That afternoon, Diane found me walking home alone. "Mom and Dad are going to be so mad. The Hendersons are coming to dinner next week, and now it'll be awkward because you threatened Kimberly." "I didn't threaten anyone," I said. "I just did what was right." Diane shook her head. "Being right doesn't matter if you make enemies of the right people. That's what Mom always says." At dinner that night, when I tried explaining what happened, my mother sighed heavily. "Abigail, there are smarter ways to handle these situations. Diane would have found a diplomatic solution." Diane nodded solemnly, the perfect daughter agreeing with the perfect wisdom. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not understanding why standing up for someone could be wrong. It was my first real lesson that in my family, appearances and connections mattered more than principles. Despite this, I continued pursuing my interests in community service and local government. I started a civics club at school, volunteered for a state senate campaign, and wrote an award-winning essay on municipal governance that was published in the local paper. My parents barely noticed. The essay hung on our refrigerator for exactly 2 days before being replaced by Diane's acceptance letter to a prestigious summer program at Yale. "Politics is for people who can't do real work," my father said dismissively when I mentioned wanting to study political science. "Doctors, lawyers, professors, those are real careers with real impact. The irony that our town mayor had appointed my father to the hospital board, a political connection that boosted his career, seemed entirely lost on him. By the time I was preparing for college, the pattern was set. I was the family disappointment before I'd even had a chance to truly fail at anything. When college acceptance letters arrived, Diane and I gathered with our parents in the living room. My hands trembled slightly as I opened mine first. Cornell, Georgetown, and Dartmouth had all said yes, along with the University of Maine's honors program with a partial scholarship. "Well?" my mother prompted, barely containing her impatience. I shared the results, saving the scholarship for last, feeling a rare spark of hope that they might be proud. My father nodded curtly. "Decent options. Let's see what Diane got." Diane, still a junior, had received early acceptance to a special summer scholars program at Princeton. My acceptances were immediately forgotten in the flurry of congratulations and champagne for my sister. Later that night, my father came to my room. "Your mother and I have discussed finances. We can support Diane through Princeton and likely law school after. For you." He cleared his throat. "We think the in-state option makes the most sense." I understood the subtext. They were betting on the child they thought would bring greater returns. "The scholarship helps," I said quietly. "Yes, well, good thing you got it." That fall, I enrolled at the University of Maine while my parents took Diane on college tours across the Ivy League. I declared a double major in political science and public administration, determined to forge my own path. During my sophomore year, I met Professor Eleanor Reynolds, a former state senator who taught public policy. After I earned the highest grade on a challenging policy analysis, she asked me to stay after class. "You have a gift for seeing the big picture," she said. "Most students get lost in details or theory, but you understand how policy affects real people." For the first time, someone saw my different way of thinking as a strength, not a failure to conform. Professor Reynolds became the mentor I desperately needed, encouraging me to apply for competitive internships and introducing me to her political connections. Meanwhile, my financial situation grew precarious. My parents' support dwindled as Diane's achievements mounted. When she was accepted to Harvard Law School during her senior year, my father called to inform me they were reallocating resources. "We need to focus on Diane's law school expenses," he explained without apology. "You'll need to figure something out for your senior year." I took on 3 part-time jobs: administrative assistant at the political science department, weekend shifts at a local diner, and evenings at the campus library. Between work and classes, I slept about 4 hours a night. During this time, I secured an internship at the state legislature through Professor Reynolds' recommendation. The position was unpaid but offered invaluable experience. I arranged my work and class schedule to accommodate it, often rushing from the Capitol building to my diner shift without time to change out of my professional clothes. My supervisor at the legislature, Representative Thomas Graham, took notice of my dedication and sharp analysis. When a paid position opened on his staff, he offered it to me. "You have a mind for policy and the heart for public service," he said. "That's a rare combination." I called my parents with my first piece of good news in years. My mother answered. "That's nice, Abigail," she said distractedly. "Did you hear Diane made law review? Only 5 first years were selected." At graduation, I received my diploma with honors, a distinction earned while working 3 jobs. My parents attended but left immediately after the ceremony to attend a celebration dinner for Diane passing her first-year law exams. My first real career setback came shortly after graduation. Encouraged by my mentors, I ran for city council in Augusta. I campaigned tirelessly, going door to door after work hours, developing detailed policy proposals, and participating in community forums. I lost by 127 votes. When I called home with the news, my father didn't hide his satisfaction. "This is why we wanted you to pursue something more substantial. Politics is a gamble." That Thanksgiving, as we gathered around the table in my parents' home, my mother asked Diane about her classes and clerkship prospects. When the conversation reluctantly turned to me, my father raised his eyebrows. "Still recovering from your failed campaign? Any plans to get a real career started?" I explained that I was working as a policy analyst for a nonprofit focused on education reform. So, a glorified researcher, my father said with a dismissive wave. At least Diane will have a squire after her name soon. As dessert was served, my mother turned to family friends also at the table. We always knew Diane would excel. As for Abigail, she sighed dramatically. We're still waiting for her to find her way. I stared at my untouched pumpkin pie, feeling invisible at my own family table. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would succeed on my own terms, and I would no longer seek their approval or share my achievements with them. They had written my story as a failure. I would write a different ending, even if they never read it. The mayor of Augusta, Rebecca Turner, called me personally after reviewing my policy proposals from the city council campaign. You lost the election but impressed a lot of people, she said. I need a chief of staff who understands both policy and people. Are you interested? At 24, I became the youngest chief of staff in the city's history, not that my family would know. Our conversations had dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional family event where Diane's accomplishments remained the central focus. As Mayor Turner's right hand, I discovered my talent for coalition building and pragmatic problem-solving. When a proposed development threatened a historic neighborhood, I facilitated meetings between developers, preservationists, and residents to craft a compromise that revitalized the area while preserving its character. The Augusta Revitalization Project won a national award for innovative urban planning. At the ceremony, Mayor Turner insisted I join her on stage. This wouldn't have happened without Abigail Mitchell's vision and tenacity, she told the audience. Remember her name. You'll be hearing it for years to come. A local reporter covered the story, but my parents never mentioned seeing it. They were busy attending Diane's law school graduation that weekend. During this time, I met James Cooper, an architectural engineer who worked on the revitalization project. Unlike my family, James really saw me, from the beginning. You have this remarkable ability to make everyone feel heard, he told me on our third date. Do you know how rare that is in politics? After a year with Mayor Turner, state party leaders approached me about running for state representative. The incumbent was retiring, and they believed I could win the seat. With James's encouragement and Mayor Turner's endorsement, I launched my campaign. This time, I won, by a comfortable margin of 1,842 votes. When I called my parents with the news, my mother's response was tepid. That's nice, dear. Did you hear Diane was hired by Callahan and Frost? It's one of the top corporate law firms in Boston. My father added, state representative is quaint. I suppose it's something to do until you find a more serious career. Meanwhile, Diane's ascent in corporate law continued unabated. She represented wealthy clients and corporations in high-profile cases, earning a substantial salary and purchasing a luxury condo in Boston's exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood. At family gatherings, my parents proudly shared updates about our lawyer daughter while politely glossing over my work. If asked directly, my mother would say, Abigail does something in government, as if I filed paperwork in a basement somewhere. In the state legislature, I built a reputation as an effective lawmaker who could work across party lines. I sponsored bills on education funding, environmental protection, and government transparency that garnered bipartisan support. During my second term, I was appointed chair of the Budget Committee, a powerful position rarely given to someone so junior. I worked 18-hour days during budget season, meticulously reviewing expenditures and finding innovative solutions to funding gaps. The governor praised our committee's work as the most transparent and balanced budget process in a decade. The resulting budget passed with unprecedented support and protected vital services without raising taxes. When Lieutenant Governor Marcus Reed saw me in action during budget negotiations, he took notice. After a particularly effective presentation where I defended funding for rural healthcare initiatives, he approached me. Representative Mitchell, I need someone with your skills on my team, he said. My policy director is retiring, and I want you to consider the position. The role would place me at the center of state government, with significant influence over the administration's policy agenda. It meant stepping back from my elected position, but the opportunity to effect change on a larger scale was compelling. James and I discussed it over dinner at our favorite restaurant. "You've accomplished so much in the legislature," he said. "But I see how excited you are about this. You'll have a wider impact." "My family will see it as quitting," I said, realizing I still cared about their opinion despite everything. James reached for my hand. "When will you stop measuring your success by their standards? You've long surpassed them." I accepted the lieutenant governor's offer, and for the next 2 years, I shaped policy on education, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic development. I deliberately maintained a low public profile, focusing on results rather than recognition. Meanwhile, Diane became a partner at her firm, the youngest in its history. My parents threw an extravagant celebration at their country club, inviting extended family and friends to toast her success. I was invited but couldn't attend due to budget negotiations. When I sent my regrets, my mother replied, "It's just as well. Diane's colleagues might find your government work quaint." What they didn't know, what I never told them, was that I had become one of the most influential figures in state government, with direct access to the governor and responsibility for policies affecting millions of citizens. And soon, events would unfold that would change everything. Lieutenant Governor Reed and I were reviewing education funding proposals when his assistant burst into the room. "Sir, you need to turn on the news." Breaking news alerts showed catastrophic flooding across the western part of our state. 3 dams had failed after unprecedented rainfall, and entire communities were underwater. The death toll was rising. Governor Harrison was overseas on a trade mission, making Reed the acting governor. He looked at me, his face grave. "Abby, I need you to coordinate our emergency response. You know the agencies, the resources, the people." For the next 72 hours, I barely slept, orchestrating rescue operations, emergency sheltering, and resource deployment. I worked directly with FEMA, the National Guard, and local officials, establishing a command center in the capital. When communications failed in the hardest-hit areas, I convinced a major telecom company to deploy emergency equipment. When evacuation routes were cut off, I found helicopter owners willing to volunteer their aircraft and pilots. On the 3rd day, Lieutenant Governor Reed joined me at a press conference to update the public. Exhausted but focused, I presented detailed information about rescue efforts, available resources, and next steps. Afterward, Reed pulled me aside. "You've done remarkable work, Abby. People are noticing." I didn't realize how true that was until a week later, when public approval ratings showed Reed's handling of the crisis at 78%, unprecedented numbers. Though I'd stayed largely behind the scenes, those in government circles knew who had orchestrated the effective response. 6 months later, as we were still managing recovery efforts, Lieutenant Governor Reed collapsed during a public event. The diagnosis: a massive heart attack. Though he survived, his doctors advised against returning to the stresses of office. In the interim, I became the de facto lieutenant governor, handling Reed's responsibilities while maintaining my policy director role. Governor Harrison, recognizing my capabilities, increasingly relied on me for critical decisions. When Reed officially resigned 3 months later, many expected the governor to appoint me as his replacement. Instead, he chose a longtime party donor, a decision that disappointed many in government who had seen my work firsthand. The governor pulled me aside after the announcement. "This isn't a reflection on you, Abby. It's politics. But your time is coming." He was right, though not in the way either of us expected. 6 months before the next election, Governor Harrison announced he wouldn't seek another term, throwing the race wide open. Party leaders approached me about running. "You've got the experience, the track record, and people trust you after the flood response," the party chair said. "You're our strongest candidate." The primary would be challenging. I would face the appointed lieutenant governor and 2 senior state senators. All had more name recognition and fundraising connections than I did. When I told James the First was considering running, he didn't hesitate. "You'd be an exceptional governor. The question is whether you want it." Did I? The role would thrust me into public attention in a way I'd avoided. My methodical, behind-the-scenes approach to governance would be challenged by the political theater of a gubernatorial campaign. Yet the opportunity to lead, to implement the policies I believed in, was compelling. I entered the race quietly, with a small announcement at a community center in the flood-ravaged town of Westbrook, where I'd spent weeks coordinating recovery efforts. My campaign focused on substance over spectacle. While my opponents held lavish fundraisers, I hosted policy forums. While they ran attack ads, I published detailed proposals on economic development, education reform, and disaster preparedness. I invited my family to my campaign launch. They didn't come. My mother called the next day. "We saw you're running for governor," she said, her tone suggesting I'd announced a plan to join the circus. "Isn't that ambitious?" Diane just won a massive settlement for her corporate client. 7 figures. The primary was closer than expected. I won by just 4,327 votes, setting up a general election against a well-funded incumbent from the opposing party. Throughout the campaign, my family remained conspicuously absent. They didn't donate, volunteer, attend events, or even put a yard sign in front of their home. When a local reporter asked about my family support, I deflected with practiced ease. "I'm focused on earning the support of all families in our state." Election night arrived with polls showing a dead heat. James and I watched results with my campaign team, the room tense as counties reported. Around midnight, my opponent called to concede. I had won by just under 2 percentage points. As governor-elect, I made a deliberate choice about my public image. Unlike many politicians who sought maximum visibility, I maintained a low profile, focusing on the work rather than personal promotion. My official portrait was professional but understated, and I limited television appearances to essential communications. This approach earned criticism from political consultants, but aligned with my governing philosophy: substance over spectacle, results over recognition. My inauguration was attended by thousands of citizens, former colleagues, and political figures. My parents sent a generic congratulations card with a gift shop pen set. Diane didn't acknowledge it at all. As I took the oath of office, I looked out at the crowd and spotted James, Professor Reynolds, Mayor Turner, and others who had believed in me when my own family hadn't. Their presence meant more than my parents' absence. During my first year as governor, I learned that Diane's law firm was under federal investigation for allegedly helping clients hide assets and evade regulations. The investigation hadn't been made public yet, but as governor, I was briefed on significant federal actions in our state. I kept this information confidential, even from James, bound by my oath of office. But I watched with growing concern as the investigation expanded, eventually becoming public knowledge. When federal prosecutors announced indictments against the firm and several of its attorneys, including Diane, I was in the middle of budget negotiations. My chief of staff, Nathan Parker, delivered the news privately. "Governor, I thought you should know immediately. Your sister Diane Mitchell is among those indicted." I felt the room spin slightly. Charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. "It's serious, Governor." I took a deep breath. "Thank you, Nathan. I need 10 minutes. Alone in my office, I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to process the personal implications before shifting back to my responsibilities as governor. I couldn't interfere with a federal case, nor should I. Justice needed to be applied equally, regardless of connections. That evening, my mother called for the first time in months. "Abigail, you have to do something about this witch hunt against Diane," she demanded without preamble. "Use your position. Call someone." "Mom, it's a federal investigation. I have no jurisdiction, and even if I did." "Don't give me that bureaucratic nonsense," she interrupted. "You finally have power. Use it for your family." I kept my voice steady. "I took an oath to uphold the law. That applies to everyone, including family." "I always knew you were jealous of her," my mother spat before hanging up. In the following weeks, as Diane's case proceeded toward trial, my parents gave interviews portraying her as a victim of overzealous prosecution. They never mentioned my position, referring to me only as Diane's sister on the rare occasions I came up. I maintained strict separation from the case, instructing my staff that I was to receive no special updates beyond what any governor would typically receive about a major federal case in their state. And then came the trial, and the day that would change everything between my family and me. The federal courthouse in Portland buzzed with activity on the opening day of United States versus Mitchell et al. News vans lined the street, and reporters clustered around the entrance, hoping to catch a glimpse of the defendants. From my office in the state capitol, I watched the coverage with a strange detachment. My sister, the golden child, the family success story, was walking into court with a team of expensive defense attorneys surrounding her like a protective shield. My parents flanked her, my father's hand on her back in a gesture of support I couldn't remember ever receiving. My mother glared at cameras, her expression daring anyone to presume her daughter's guilt. I made a decision that surprised my staff. I would attend portions of the trial. Not as the governor, but as Abigail Mitchell, private citizen. Are you sure that's wise? Nathan asked when I told him. The optics. I'm not concerned with optics, I said. I need to see this for myself. I arranged to sit quietly in the back of the courtroom, dressed conservatively, without the usual trappings of office. No security detail, no special treatment. Most people knew me from official portraits or occasional press conferences, but in person, without context, I was just another observer. The evidence presented by federal prosecutors was damning. Emails, financial records, and testimony from former colleagues painted a picture of systematic fraud. Diane had allegedly helped clients hide assets during divorce proceedings, shield money from tax authorities, and conceal evidence of corporate wrongdoing. During a break on the third day, I encountered my parents in the courthouse hallway. My mother noticed me first, her eyes widening with surprise before narrowing with suspicion. So you've come to gloat, she said, keeping her voice low but sharp. I'm here to understand what happened, I replied evenly. My father stepped forward. What happened is that your sister is being persecuted for doing her job. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Playing government in your little office while Diane was in the real world, making real money, having real impact. I absorbed his words, noting the irony of his assessment. As governor, I oversaw a $9 billion budget and policies affecting millions of citizens, while Diane had apparently been helping wealthy clients break the law. The evidence seems substantial, I said quietly. Evidence can be manipulated, my mother snapped. You could help if you wanted to. Make a call. Use your influence. That would be illegal, I pointed out. And wrong, my father scoffed. Always so righteous. This is your sister we're talking about. Yes, and the law applies to her just like everyone else. As we spoke, I noticed other trial attendees watching our interaction with interest, though no one seemed to recognize me out of context. Your sister supported you your entire life, my mother hissed, rewriting history with breathtaking ease. And now, when she needs you, you hide behind rules and regulations. I took a deep breath. When, exactly, did Diane support me? When she told you I was wasting my time with community service. When she laughed along with Dad about my quaint, political career. When she missed my inauguration for a spa weekend. Before they could respond, the bailiff announced court was resuming. My father leaned close as he passed me. Always the victim, he muttered. While you were feeling sorry for yourself, Diane was achieving something meaningful. In the courtroom, I returned to my seat in the back row. Diane glanced around as she entered, her eyes passing over me without recognition before she took her place at the defense table. As testimony continued, the scope of the wrongdoing became clearer. Diane had been a key player in a scheme that had cost clients' spouses, business partners, and the government millions of dollars. The evidence wasn't just substantial, it was overwhelming. During the defense's presentation, Diane took the stand. Under her attorney's questioning, she portrayed herself as a dedicated advocate who might have been overzealous, but never criminal. She spoke about her prestigious education, her commitment to clients, and her family's legacy of excellence. I was raised to succeed, she testified, her voice breaking artfully. My parents taught us that results matter. Perhaps I took that lesson too much to heart. I watched my parents nodding in the front row, buying completely into this narrative of family pressure, creating an overzealous attorney. It was a clever defense strategy and a complete distortion of our childhood. The pressure had always been on me, not Diane. She had been praised and celebrated while I was criticized and dismissed. On cross-examination, the prosecutor methodically dismantled Diane's defense. He presented email after email showing she knew exactly what she was doing. In one particularly damaging exchange, Diane had written to a colleague, "Client needs this money to disappear before the wife's attorneys find it. The usual offshore route should work." By the trial's final day, Diane's confidence had visibly eroded. My parents looked drawn and worried. I continued sitting quietly in the back, observing the family dynamics I'd been entangled in my entire life. During a lunch break, I overheard my mother speaking to a family friend in the hallway. "It's so unfair," she lamented. "Diane has done everything right her entire life. Meanwhile, her sister is somewhere pushing papers in some government office, completely useless to us in this situation." I slipped away before she could see me, returning to the courtroom for closing arguments. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before reaching a verdict. As they filed back in, I studied Diane's face. For the first time in her life, she looked genuinely afraid. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of evidence tampering, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of obstruction of justice, how do you find?" "Guilty." My mother gasped audibly. My father's shoulders slumped. Diane stood perfectly still, as if movement might shatter her completely. The judge announced sentencing would occur in 3 weeks and adjourned the court. As people began filing out, I remained seated, processing the moment. My sister, the golden child, the favorite, the success story, was now a convicted felon facing years in prison. I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for all of us, for the family we could have been if love hadn't been conditioned on achievement, if support hadn't been reserved for only one child. As the courtroom emptied, I finally stood to leave. And that's when everything changed. The sentencing hearing began promptly at 9 a.m. 3 weeks later. I arrived early, taking my usual seat in the back row. The courtroom was even more crowded than during the trial, filled with reporters, legal observers, and curious citizens. My parents entered with Diane, all three dressed in somber colors. Diane's normally perfect appearance showed signs of strain, her complexion pallid, her movements stiff. They sat in the front row without glancing around the courtroom. As we waited for proceedings to begin, I overheard my parents whispering. "This judge better show some leniency," my father muttered. "Diane deserves consideration for her standing in the community." My mother nodded. Unlike some people in this family, Diane has actually contributed something to society. I absorbed the familiar sting of their dismissal, marveling at how, even now, they maintained the fiction of Diane's superiority. Judge Evelyn Montgomery entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. She was known for her fair but firm sentencing, having served on the federal bench for 15 years after a distinguished career as a prosecutor. Before we proceed with sentencing in the case of United States v. Mitchell, Judge Montgomery began, "I want to address some matters raised in the pre-sentencing report and character statements." She looked directly at Diane. "Ms. Mitchell, your defense team has emphasized your standing in the community and family background as mitigating factors. They note your prestigious education and professional accomplishments." The judge paused, reviewing documents before her. "However, the nature of the crimes committed suggests a belief that you were somehow above the law, that rules applying to others didn't apply to you." Diane shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The evidence presented at trial showed not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained pattern of deliberate wrongdoing that harmed multiple parties and undermined the justice system itself. My parents exchanged worried glances. Judge Montgomery continued reviewing the case details and sentencing guidelines. As she spoke, her gaze occasionally swept the courtroom, a habit many judges develop to maintain awareness of their surroundings. During one such scan, her eyes passed over me, then snapped back with sudden recognition. Her composure, the practiced neutrality of an experienced judge, faltered visibly. "Is that?" she began before catching herself. But the microphone caught her next words clearly. "Wait, you're the governor?" The courtroom, previously hushed in respectful silence, erupted in murmurs. Heads turned, people craned their necks to see who had caused the judge's unusual reaction. My parents whipped around, their expressions transforming from confusion to shock as they spotted me in the back row. Diane half rose from her seat, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. For a moment, no one moved. Then Judge Montgomery tapped her gavel, restoring order. "My apologies for the interruption," she said, recovering her professional demeanor. "Let's continue with the sentencing." But the damage was done. Reporters were already furiously typing on their phones. Courthouse staff whispered behind their hands. Everyone was connecting the dots between the convicted attorney and the state's highest executive. My parents stared at me with expressions I couldn't fully decipher. Shock, certainly, but also something like dawning comprehension. For perhaps the first time, they were seeing me clearly, understanding that while they had been dismissing my career as insignificant, I had risen to a position of genuine power and responsibility. Judge Montgomery proceeded with sentencing, her voice steady once more. "Diane Mitchell, for the crimes of conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice, this court sentences you to 68 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $2.4 million to the victims of your crimes." My sister seemed barely to register the sentence, still looking back at me with an expression of disbelief. The judge continued, "You will surrender to federal authorities 2 weeks from today to begin serving your sentence." With a final tap of her gavel, the hearing concluded. As people began filing out, reporters approached me, shouting questions. "Governor Mitchell, did you know about your sister's crimes? Why didn't you publicly acknowledge your relationship to the defendant? Will you be issuing a pardon?" I rose calmly, nodding to the bailiff who was attempting to maintain order. "No comments at this time," I said quietly, moving toward a side exit where Nathan was waiting, having been alerted to the situation. Before I could leave, my mother pushed through the crowd, my father close behind her. "All this time," she said, her voice trembling with some complex emotion. "You've been governor? And you said nothing. Would it have mattered?" I asked simply. "Would it have changed how you see me?" My father's face flushed. "Of course it would have." "No," I interrupted gently. "It would have changed how you treat me, not how you see me. There's a difference. Security personnel were creating a path for me now, gently moving people aside." "We need to talk about this," my mother insisted. "About Diane's sentence." "Surely now you can." I shook my head. The justice system worked as it should. I won't interfere with that, not even for family. As I turned to leave, I caught a final glimpse of Diane, standing alone by the defense table, watching me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Respect. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but I moved steadily toward the waiting state vehicle, Nathan shielding me from the worst of the chaos. "Well," he said as we settled into the back seat, "I guess the cat's out of the bag with your family." I looked back at the courthouse, where my parents were now surrounded by their own swarm of reporters. "Yes," I said quietly. "I suppose it is." The revelation in the courtroom made headlines across the state. Governor's sister sentenced in fraud case, family secret. Governor Mitchell's connection to convicted attorney, Mitchell family drama, the governor and the felon. I issued a brief statement through my office. "Justice has been served in a federal case involving my sister. I have maintained appropriate separation from this matter due to the obvious conflict of interest. I will not be commenting further on what is ultimately a private family matter." The media frenzy lasted about a week before a budget negotiation and a teachers' strike demanded public attention. The news cycle moved on, but my relationship with my family had fundamentally changed. 3 days after the sentencing, my mother called. "We need to talk," she said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Can we come to wherever you live now?" I gave her the address of the governor's residence, a historic home that had housed state governors for over a century. "Oh," she said softly. "I didn't realize." The next evening, my parents arrived at the residence, visibly uncomfortable as security verified their identities and escorted them inside. They seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the grandeur of the house and the reality of my position. I met them in the formal living room, where I'd hosted foreign dignitaries and business leaders. James stood beside me, his presence a steady comfort. "This is James Cooper, my partner," I said, making introductions. James, my parents, Richard and Margaret Mitchell. My father extended his hand mechanically. "How long have you?" "6 years," James answered pleasantly. "I've heard a lot about you both." An awkward silence fell. I didn't offer to show them around the residence or ease their discomfort with small talk. Finally, my mother spoke. "Why didn't you tell us about being governor?" I considered the question carefully. Would you have believed me? Or would you have found some way to diminish it, to explain why it wasn't really an achievement? "That's not fair," my father protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I gestured for them to sit. "When I was elected to the state legislature, you called it quaint. When I became budget chair, you didn't even acknowledge it. At what point would my accomplishments have been enough for you to see me as successful?" My mother's eyes filled with tears, genuine ones, not the performative emotion she typically deployed. "We always wanted what was best for you." "No," I corrected gently. "You wanted what was best for your image of the family. Those aren't the same thing." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We need to discuss Diane's situation. Surely now you understand that family should come first." "I understand my oath of office," I replied. I swore to uphold the law equally for all citizens. Creating special exceptions for family would violate that oath. "But Diane committed serious crimes," I continued. "Multiple crimes over years, harming real people. The sentence was fair, lenient even, given the guidelines." My mother dabbed at her eyes. "She's your sister." "Yes, she is. And I love her. But love doesn't mean enabling wrongdoing or shielding people from the consequences of their actions." After they left, James wrapped his arms around me. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I said, surprised to find it was true. For the first time, I spoke to them as equals. As adults, not as the disappointing daughter seeking approval. 2 days before Diane was scheduled to report to prison, she asked to see me. We met at a quiet cafe outside the city, away from reporters and curious onlookers. She looked different, humbled, perhaps. The polished corporate attorney veneer had cracked, revealing something more human beneath. "I almost didn't recognize you in court," she said after we'd ordered coffee. "You've changed." "Not really," I replied. "I'm the same person I've always been. You just never saw me clearly." She nodded slowly. "Mom and Dad are struggling with everything. Your position, my conviction. It's like their whole worldview collapsed. They created a narrative where you were the success story and I was the disappointment," I said. Reality didn't cooperate with that narrative. Diane stared into her coffee. I bought into it too. Their version of success: prestigious degrees, high salary, social status. I never questioned whether that was actually making me happy. "And was it?" I asked. She laughed humorlessly. "I'm going to prison tomorrow. What do you think?" We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I read about your flood response. And your education reform bill. The profiles of you in office. You've done remarkable things." Coming from Diane, this acknowledgement felt monumental. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, "for how I treated you. For believing I was somehow better because I followed the path they laid out." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sorry too, that we lost so many years to competition that never needed to exist. Will you?" She hesitated. "Will you write to me while I'm inside?" "Of course," I promised. "And I'll make sure you have access to educational programs. The corrections system should be about rehabilitation, not just punishment." She smiled wryly. "Governor Mitchell taking a personal interest in prison reform?" "Just a sister keeping in touch," I corrected. "The policy changes will benefit everyone in the system, not just you." As I drove back to the capital, I felt a weight lifting, not completely gone, but lighter. The approval I'd sought for so long didn't matter anymore. I had built a life of purpose and impact, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. In the months that followed, I channeled my experiences into meaningful reform. My administration implemented a comprehensive ethics training program for state employees, strengthened whistleblower protections, and created a task force on white-collar crime prevention. I also initiated a review of the state's correctional education programs, ultimately expanding access to college courses and vocational training for inmates, changes that would help Diane, yes, but also thousands of others seeking to rebuild their lives. My parents and I established a cautious, more honest relationship. They attended my second inauguration after I won re-election by a comfortable margin. Their pride seemed genuine, if belated. During a family dinner 6 months into my second term, the first such gathering in years, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about measuring success by the wrong standards." I looked up, surprised. "The flooding response," he continued. "Those education initiatives, the ethics reforms, those are real achievements that help real people." He hesitated. I should have seen that sooner. My mother reached across the table for my hand. "We were wrong, Abigail. About so many things. It wasn't a complete healing, too much water under the bridge for that, but it was a beginning." Later that evening, as James and I walked through the garden of the governor's residence, I reflected on the journey. "Success isn't what I thought it was," I told him. "It's not titles or recognition or even family approval. It's impact. It's knowing your work matters." He smiled. "You figured that out long before they did." "I had help," I said, squeezing his hand. "From people who saw me clearly from the beginning." As I finish sharing the story with you all, I wonder, how do you define success in your own life? Is it through other people's expectations or through your own values and impact? Comment below with your thoughts on what true success means to you. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your own path despite others' expectations. And remember, sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are giving you the greatest gift, the freedom to surprise them. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to define success on your own terms.